everyone, it's Abby with the Bead Place and beadplace.net, and in today's video I'm going to be bringing you a highly, and by highly I mean hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of requests from you guys. I'm going to be bringing you a highly requested video tutorial on a basic metalsmithing technique. So this is how to make my silver raindrop stacking rings. You can find all of the tools and materials that I'm using today at www.beadplace.net. Before we get started, please remember to like this video by giving it a big thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and share this video with your friends. Also, we've got our Patreon link down below if you want to support our channel even further. Make sure to check it out. Let's cover the tools and materials. All right, so first let's talk safety. You always want to make sure to take the proper safety precautions anytime we're going to be working with fire. So that means making sure that the surface that you're working on is fire resistant. You don't want to be working on a table with a tablecloth. Make sure that you have a floor covering put down if you're unexperienced. And then also, if you have a fire extinguisher, you can go ahead and use a fire extinguisher or at least keep it nearby. Make sure you have safety glasses on hand. Make sure you have a ponytail holder if you have long hair. Make sure you're not wearing long sleeves or drapey clothing. Take off all jewelry that could swoop down into your project. So just common sense kind of things. And then this is me in a professional setting doing this in a well-ventilated area. Make sure you're doing the same if you're working at home. So now let's talk materials. Really the only actual material that we're going to be using for this project is 21 gauge sterling silver round wire. This is the wire that I use for my rings. You can play with it a little bit, but you can't really get too much smaller with this wire, otherwise they'll be a little bit too flimsy. Can't really get too much bigger for this wire unless you have a different type of torch than a butane torch, because it will be too thick to ball the wire properly. So let's talk about torches. I'm going to be using a butane micro torch. These are readily available either at beadplace.net or your local bead shop or metalsmith supply shop. You can also find them at kitchen supply stores, because this is the same thing as a creme brulee torch, and then you can find them at your local hardware store. You'll also want to pick up a can of butane. Likely you'll be able to find this at your kitchen supply store or at your local hardware store. We're going to be wanting to have a specific flame-proof surface to work on. So this is like a kiln shelf or magnesia, or you don't want to use asbestos, but it's a material similar to that, and so this just stops the heat from transferring through onto your work surface. So we're going to use a couple of different types of filing and polishing tools today. I have a buffing pad. This is like a pro polish pad or a micro buffing pad. It leaves a shine and it kind of removes the top surface of our metal. We also have a file. This is just a round file. I like to use a round file for rings, just in case anything goes wrong. And then I have a brush here. I have a brass side and a steel side. Either one works. We're just going to use this to get the majority of the fire scale off of our silver. So as for tools, I have a flush cutter. And this is just the tool I'm going to use to cut my silver. You could use a side cutter or any other kind of wire cutter that you have, because the ends get bald anyway. I also have a chain nose pliers, and this is a pliers that I've dedicated solely to working with my fire projects. You can see that the ends are kind of discolored. This won't be held in the torch, but it will touch hot metal. So with repetitive use in high flame, it can kind of change the way that your the steel on your pliers behaves. So make sure you're dedicating a pliers specifically to fire projects. Let's see, what else? We're going to be using a metal mandrel for this project. This is a metal ring mandrel. You can find these at beadplace.net. I have a chasing hammer. This is what we're going to use to get a nice hammered texture on our ring. It's going to harden it, and it's going to actually allow us to set it to the correct size. Now, the last two things I want to mention are really important. You want to make sure you have a tub of water or a cup of water, and this is what we're going to use to quench our metal. We also use this in case anything goes wrong. So to extinguish any flames if you don't have a fire extinguisher. And then kept off to the side is a paper towel or a cloth or something like that so that we can dry our material, but make sure that this is off to the side of your work surface, nowhere near the flame, and we just want to make sure it doesn't catch on fire. So I think that was everything. It's a lot of stuff to talk about. All right, let's get started. The first thing that we're going to do is fill our torch with butane. I like to make sure that the gas is turned all the way off before I start. So this is the kind of torch that we sell here. Every micro torch is going to be a little bit different, but there's a plus and a minus, and we want to turn it all the way over to the minus. I'm going to take the base off of my torch and set it aside. I'm going to turn my torch upside down with the nozzle pointing away from me. Took the cap off my butane, and I'm going to align the nozzle on the butane with the nozzle on the bottom of my torch. So then I'm going to press down until I start to hear it spit. And it started to spit, so I took the butane away. Always hold this away from your face and away from your loved ones. And then we're going to put the base back on the torch. So now what I'm going to do is test the flame before I get started. So I'm going to turn the gas on to about halfway. I'm going to pull down the safety on my torch, and I'm going to make sure my butane and everything flammable is out of the way. So pull down the safety on my torch and then ignite it. So I do have a nice flame here. And just to show you while I'm at it, I'm going to press down the hold on my torch so that I don't have to press my thumb down the entire time that I am using the torch. So I'm going to adjust the flame higher by moving the gas all the way up to the plus. And for this, I'm probably just going to use it with the gas all the way up for this project. But you want to make sure it's at least midway. Now, this torch has a gas adjustment, so I can adjust the amount of butane and oxygen that's going into my flame by adjusting the nozzle here. And you see the flame gets a little bit tighter and a little bit looser as I do that. So we want a pretty tight flame, not a bushy flame. So I'm going to keep it right about like that. Oh, right about like right about like that. All right, let's get started. First, we're going to figure out what length to cut our wire. In order to figure that out, we're going to do a little bit of math. So I'm making rings to add to my stack that I wear on my middle finger here. The rings that I'm making are going to be about size 6. Now, first, we're going to make a smaller ring than necessary, and then we're going to hammer it on the mandrel. As we hammer it, the ring gets a little bit bigger. So we're going to start at a 4 to eventually get to a size 6. So whatever size ring you're wanting to make, you're going to measure the mandrel about 2 sizes smaller. So I'm going to measure right at the 4. So I'm using just a tape measure here. You can use millimeters if you'd like. I'm just going to use inches because it's a little bit easier for me. So this is about 2 inches of wire. So I know that my ring band is going to be about 2 inches, but then I'm going to need extra wire that I'm going to use to ball up into the ball on the front of my ring. So I'm going to add another inch to that measurement. So for me, I know that my measurements need to be approximately 3 inches for my cuts of wire. So again, that is your ring size. Let's say I was going to be measuring for a size 8. I would drop that down to a 6. I'd measure the mandrel at a 6, and then I'd add an inch to that measurement. So I know that my measurement is 3 inches, so I'm going to cut a length of 21 gauge round silver wire that's 3 inches. Now, a lot of people ask if this works for other metals. You can do this technique with fine silver wire, and you can do it with copper. However, copper is going to give you a lot more difficult of a time. You might need to actually use a finer gauge wire in order to use copper. So now what I'm going to do is show you how to wrap this wire on the mandrel in order to set it to start making our ring. I'm holding the wire right at the size 4. I'm going to bring the ends of the wire up so that they're about equal. And then I'm going to bring them down so that they are opposite one another. Again, I'm making sure that I'm right on that size 4. Now at this point, I'm going to hold the wire as best I can so that I'm anchoring it at that size 4. I should have a 1/2 inch on either side, making sure that it's fairly uniform. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to twist these wires kind of like a bread tie so that I can anchor them right at that size 4 and that I can kind of conjoin them together. Now, no matter how you try, likely you won't get it tight at that ring size that you're going for. So there's a couple different things that you can do. If you notice that you're having a really difficult time anchoring it right at that size that you're going for, you can bring it up a little bit. Or you can do what I'm about to show you. You can take your pliers and just kind of give it a little bit of a twist, and that'll anchor it tight right at that ring size. We don't want it so tight that we're not able to get it off the mandrel again, but we want it to be right at the size where we need it. So what I'm going to do is continue loosely twisting these wires together, not so loose that I'm able to see light through them, but not so tight that we're going to have a hard time balling our wire. The wire likes to ball when it'll have an easier time balling when it's a little bit more straight. So a twist about like this is fine. So once it's twisted all the way up, what we can do is kind of give it a final pinch or so with our pliers to make sure those ends aren't sticking out too far. Then we'll take it off the mandrel, and it should look like this. So next we're going to put our ring on our flame-proof surface. And I want to warn you before we get started that this might not work every single time you do it. I have been actively metalsmithing for the last 15 years. I've taught metalsmithing classes all over the country, and I can tell you that it doesn't work every single time I do it. Also, barometric pressure affects how metal behaves. So the first time you try this, maybe don't try it on a rainy or a stormy day. But I want to show you, if we do have some mess ups, you can just melt your silver into a fun little pebble like this and hammer it out and use it for another project. So it's not wasted if we don't get a perfect success the first time. So like I said, we're going to put our metal on a flame-proof surface, move everything out of the way that's flammable, make sure you're working in an area that has proper ventilation, and then also make sure while you're working that you're not hovering directly over the flame. Make sure your hair is pulled back. Make sure you have a fire extinguisher or a bucket of water nearby. And now we can get started. Oh, make sure your safety glasses are on. That's the other thing. So now we can get started. So what I'm going to do is turn my torch on, and I'm going to bring it in. So I'm going to do this as slow as I can to show you how it works. So I'm just going to bring my heat slowly to the end of the wire. And what I'm wanting to do is start a ball to form on the end of my wire. So you can see my wire's getting really soft and it's starting to fuse together. There we've got a ball, and as soon as that ball travels up to my ring band, we're going to take the heat away. Oh, it joined, so I'm going to take the heat away and turn it off. So you can see, if you bring in the camera real close, you can see that I got a little bit of thinning right here on this side, and I started to move the metal back towards this side of the ring band. So I left the heat on a little bit too long, but I think we're going to try to save it. I'm going to make a couple more and show you what they look like. But at this point, what I'm going to do is take this ring with my pliers and drop it in the bucket of water to quench it. So usually I like to do that immediately, and then it cools it immediately. And at this point, I could actually go in, reach my hand in, and it has cooled to the touch. It's perfectly fine to handle. Now, I'm going to go in with my paper towel and dry it. We always want to make sure that it's dry before we go in with the torch again, or before it touches any of our metal tools. So this is what it looks like. One thing that I want to show you real quick, if you make a ring and when you're twisting it, one side of the wire gets a little bit higher than the other side, you want to make sure to go in and flatten that out as best you can, because it won't ball uniformly if it's not flat. So just take your pliers in and just kind of flatten it so that one side isn't higher than the other. If we would leave it, we'd have a higher chance of the ball just attaching to one side and not the other, and we might have a break in the other side. So make sure it's nice and flat and try to keep everything uniform. Make sure that your twisted wire is coming straight out of the circle and it's not closer angled one side than the other. Let's get back to torching. All right, notice how I'm kind of directing the inner blue flame versus the outer blue flame at my metal. That's because that's where the flame is the hottest. But you don't want to get it too hot that we're going to melt through our metal. This is thin gauge wire, so remember that. So once that joins, we're going to stop and set down the torch so that it's away from us, and then drop it in the quench. You might have heard it. I'm not sure if the camera picked it up or the microphone picked it up, but you might have heard a little psst noise. I don't want you guys to be startled when you drop the metal in. That's perfectly normal. So the faster you can get the metal in the water, the more likely we're going to shoot off some of the fire scale. But likely with silver, that won't happen. If you're working with copper, it'll happen a little bit faster. So I'm going to take these out and I'm going to dry them off, and then we're going to start to hammer them. Next, what we're going to do is put the ring onto the mandrel. You want to have it pretty tight on the mandrel, and then we're going to start to hammer it. Now, the hammering not only hardens the metal, but it also allows us to have perfect control over the size of the ring that we're making. So at this point, my ring is about a size 4. It's a little under the size 4. Kind of adjusting it with the heat allows the metal to straighten out exactly, and usually we get a little bit of a bigger ring than how we started. The metal relaxes, any of those twists and kinks get out of it, and as it anneals, we're able to really kind of tighten it on the ring mandrel a little bit lower. So now what we're going to do is take our chasing hammer in, and we're going to hammer around the band. We're going to be really careful that we don't hammer over that beautiful ball or that drop that we've just made. So I like to hold the mandrel as I hammer it. If you have a bench pillow, you can use that, but I feel like I have a little bit more control hammering it this way. Now again, we're using the chasing hammer side to hammer it rather than the ball peen side. You can, if you're very careful, use the ball peen side, but you're going to be more likely to have damage to your ring and hammer it a little bit too hard with direct impact. So I'm going to go in and hammer. As the metal becomes loose on the mandrel, you can pull it down and then keep hammering. I like to take the ring off, turn it around the other way. And you'll notice that as we're hammering, it gets lower and lower on the mandrel. So you want to watch as you're hammering to ensure that you don't go past the size that you need. All right, so we are at about a 5.5 right now. And now is where I like to pay extra close attention to the top. I can kind of bring my hammer in at a slight angle that matches the roundness of my hammer head. And that way I can get it pretty close to the ball without actually striking the ball. Keep in mind that we have a thinner wire in some cases on either side of the ball. If you kept the torch there a little bit too long, it could thin the wire in that area because it wants to kind of pull the metal all in together. The silver molecules want to kind of like reform almost into a ball, so it'll start to pull some of the metal from the band into the ball. So just be aware of that as you hammer and kind of hammer shy over any of those areas. Now you might be wondering, Why in the world do we hammer it so much that we go from a size 4 all the way to a size 6? So we're hammering it to change sizes dramatically and drastically. And that is because we are working with very thin wire. So we want to make sure that we get enough hammering in there to harden it so that it stays a durable ring and it stays round. Also, because we are working with very thin wire, we want the ring band to look a little bit wider. So if you look at the rings that I'm wearing, it looks like this ring band is so much thicker than it actually is. It's actually just a thin hammered out 21 gauge wire that's been hammered very, very flat, and that gives us a bigger, kind of more substantial looking ring. So I'm going to keep hammering and I will show you my rings when I have them done. So now we're going to get a lot of this fire scale off of the rings. So one tip that I can share with you when polishing is you want to put it back on the mandrel, and that is going to prevent unnecessary wear, and it's going to stop the rings from misshapening as you handle them rough while polishing. So put it back on the mandrel, and then you can polish it any way you'd like. I'm going to start off with a brush. You want to be sure that your mandrel can withstand a brush. Sometimes mandrels are not etched very deep, or sometimes they have markings on them that would come off if you brush them. But I'm just going to brush over my rings lightly just to get a bulk of the fire scale off. If you notice while you're polishing that there are any parts on your ring that are a little bit sharp, you can take a file in and just gently file any areas that are a little bit rough. You'll notice that some of the balls are a bit pitted, and that is because sterling silver is actually an alloy, so it's not pure silver. If we were using pure silver, these would be perfectly round, smooth balls. I actually prefer working with sterling to fine silver because I like that organic look. It kind of mimics rocks or things that you've seen in nature. But just know that you can certainly get a more refined look if you're using fine silver or pure silver. However, it will be much softer. So the reason why sterling silver is alloyed is to make it stronger, and it can withstand a lot of wear that way. And now that we've gotten the bulk of the fire scale and oxidation off of the rings with a brush, you could also use steel wool, we are going to go in with a buffing pad. So I like to use a pad like this and just buff in circular motions over the rings. I like to concentrate mostly on the ball, so I get those kind of raised areas nice and shiny, and then we really start to see those cool pits in the silver after we shine it. And this is not a quick thing if you have like a burnishing wheel, or if you have a tumbler, you can certainly use that, but I really prefer handwork. Also, to get these nice and shiny from the get-go, you could drop them in a pickling solution, and that's just kind of like an acid solution that removes all of the oxidation off of your work. Or you could even use like a tarnish remover, and that would work as well. But I like leaving a little bit of that tarnish in there because you can really see that it's a handmade kind of almost rough looking project, and that's what I really love about my style of metalsmithing. I really like to do primitive pieces using basic techniques, and I like to let the metal processes shine. So you know earlier how I said if you mess one up, you can turn it into a little kind of pebble of silver? I'm going to show you guys how to do that. So this is a ring that I made the other day, and I just messed it up. So when I was hammering it, I unfortunately hammered over the ball. I wasn't really paying attention, and I hammered it flat, and it's not pretty. So I'm going to show you guys how to ball this into a pebble of silver like this. So I just have it on one of my flame-proof surfaces. I'm going to take the torch in and I'll show you how to ball it. Basically what we're going to do is we're just going to melt the silver. So we're going to kind of melt it until it looks like liquid mercury, kind of heat around the entire thing so it's nice and hot. And then we're going to kind of concentrate on one area. So you can see that it has started to ball. So the silver wants to kind of run together to get away from that heat. So we'll probably end up with a couple of different balls here of silver. So we'll kind of let them all ball up. We're going to turn off the heat. With these, I like to let them cool a little bit before I dunk them in the quenching liquid. I'm going to slide my bucket of water over, and I'm just going to dunk them. I'm going to grab my paper towel and set them on the paper towel as I do it. And it's really important to not get your flame-proof surface wet, because if there's water on it and the water stays on it, what could happen is that water will boil when you bring the torch back in, and we don't want that to happen. So we want to make sure that these are nice and dry before we take them back in and torch them again. So we're going to combine these. What I like to do is put them into one little notch in my flame-proof surface. So you can kind of dig into it with your pliers and create a well, or if you already have a well from damage to your flame-proof surface, you can use that well. So notice how they're all touching. So I'm going to go back in with my torch now that they're all touching. And it might take a little bit of time, but eventually they'll all start to melt together. I like to kind of move my torch a little bit just to make sure the heat's going everywhere. And I'm using the tip of that inner blue flame as my point of contact. There we go. They kind of hop together there. I don't know that I'm going to be able to get that other one to join in, so I might, I'll probably have to turn the torch off and combine them one more time. There we go. Now it's all one ball. So after you've quenched your little silver pebble, what we can do is actually hammer it flat and use it in jewelry. So I've got it on a bench block here, and I'm going to make sure that I've found its most level side, and I'm going to hammer. All right, so you can see here that just my one mistake ring turned into a cool little blank, so I could file this into a uniform shape or cut it into a uniform shape or not, and then I'll likely punch a hole in it, maybe use the ball peen side of my hammer to make it really light reflectant, or maybe I'll stamp a letter or a word into it or a design, and then I can use this as a charm, or you know, you can punch through it and use it as a spacer, whatever you want to do. So it's not waste. You can definitely save up your silver into larger pellets, or save it for casting if you're really into metalsmithing. But make sure to save your silver scrap because there is use for it. So these are the finished rings. Thank you so much for joining us today to learn how to make our Raindrop stacker rings. If you enjoyed watching this video, please give us a big thumbs up. It really helps our channel out. If you have any questions, or if you just want to say hi, you can leave a comment down below. I do my best to respond to all of the comments. Please share this video with your friends if you have friends who make jewelry or enjoy metalsmithing. Anything that has to do with this video, please share this video with your friends. If you want to support our channel even further, you can subscribe, and then one step beyond that, you can check out our Patreon link down below. Patreon is just a way to support our channel with a monthly subscription. We have a private Facebook page for our Patreon patrons, and we do sneak peeks of upcoming videos. We do a quarterly giveaway, and there's lots of fun perks to becoming a Patreon member.